in 2009, it was kind of a career-changing event for me. There was a fire, the Lockheed fire, that burned about 9,000 acres. It burned 1,600 acres of this property. It burned through a whole bunch of areas that I had been managing for about 8 years. And so pictures help, you know, we'll get into some of that. It was a really great thing for many of the ecosystems on the property that it burned through. I just wanted to give you a little bit more about the kind of complexity or the management objectives on this property. I consider it really a unique venture for all those nonprofits that I was referring to that are involved because it has a whole mix of land uses together that are all kind of combining to protect conservation values, but also sustainably manage natural resources on the property. So of the 8,500 acres, about 3,500 acres in the pink on this map are working forest. And then the light green on this map is another just over 3,000 acres, and that's restoration reserve. And the dark green is preservation reserve. And so each sub-watershed on the property following the acquisition was assessed for anything you could think of: erosion potential, topographic shading for climate change resilience, you know, wildlife corridors, presence of rare plants, presence of already developing, you know, old growth and late cereal stage characteristics in trees, you know, site potential in terms of productivity, like, you know, soil depth and quality and all of those things. And each sub-watershed, based on all of those metrics, was kind of considered its value for restoration or its resilience to being managed. And that, in that way, it was divided up into a working forest and a restoration reserve.
We're missing one car.
Oh no!
Yeah, so can I borrow the key and go
Yeah.
see if I can find it?
Glad that wasn't it.
How did you do that? Can you call them?
I can
Do you
try.
have Lisa's?
How many acres are for
I
preservation?
don't know that I'm gonna have service.
Well, so the preservation reserves are the they're like some of the parts of the property that have old growth structure. They're not inordinately high in their tree density per acre as a result of previous clear cutting. How many acres are in preservation reserve? I would say that it's about I forget off the top of my head. I have known all
You
of
had
these
mentioned
numbers.
that green, the dark green.
Yeah, so I think it's just over, it's about 1,200 acres in preservation reserve.
Okay.
And those parts of the property are the parts where you wouldn't need to do much to push those areas into their desired future condition, which we struggle and debate with, you know, what is that? And it's kind of like the reference condition. Parts of the property or parts of other properties nearby that have not had huge, you know, anthropogenic influences, mostly clear-cut logging, and areas that have, you know, some of the characteristics still that go away when you have fire suppression. Like in the preservation reserves, they're already kind of well set up to be fabulous wildlife habitat, and they don't need a bunch of weed management and, you know, other structural kind of changes to make them optimal habitat. I should back up 1 second and say that I'm a registered professional forester, and so what I do on this property is plan and implement the working forest management as well as the restoration forest management, and then and also do security and wildlife monitoring and some of the other things that go on the property. But my background is in forest management.
And what team do you work with? Are there other biologists or land managers that you work with in your team?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Depending what there's many projects going on. There's public access plan. There's, you know, creek restoration where we're adding large wood. There's invasive weed control. Like we're dealing with this really aggressive Clematis vitalba population down in the riparian area of San Vicente Creek. For each of those, you know, there's a suite of experts that contract, consult, weigh in, come from agencies, from the Resource Conservation District. I work with several ornithologists on, our wildlife monitoring. We're trying to kind of capture the baseline prior to public access of what species are using this property currently and how, and what, in order to try to elucidate over time whether there are, changes in species composition, or if, particularly rare species or sensitive species are impacted by that. So there's an adaptive management strategy.
Which species are of concern right now?
Well, with public access specifically,